Hello, my name's Tristram Hooley, and I'm giving a series of lectures for the Inland Norway University of Applied Sciences on the context for career. In this lecture, I'm going to be looking at environmental and climate change. Only when the last tree has been cut down, only when the last river has been poisoned, only when the last fish has been caught, only then will you find that money cannot be eaten. This Native American saying reminds us how intertwined humanity is with the natural environment. We require the natural environment to exist in order for us to exist. And yet, we've got good evidence that the environment is going through some fundamental and human-related changes. I'm going to focus a lot on climate change in this lecture, but it's not the only environmental change that's worthy of note. There are many other things that we could also talk about which have effects which are not directly related to climate change. But let's focus in on that. And this data from Berkeley Earth shows us that over the last couple of 100 years, we've seen a radical change in the average temperature that the Earth was experiencing during July. And this year, I think, is higher than ever. So this is profoundly worrying. And while this is not the place for us to rehash the debate and the literature on climate change, I think it's sufficient to say that there is an overwhelming consensus that there is a fundamental change happening to the temperature of the Earth. The question I suppose many people might be asking is, why does this matter for career? What is the issues that mean this kind of change that's being observed by climate scientists matters for the kind of work that we do in the careers field? Well, I suppose the reason why this matters is that many professions are environmentally dependent. Some more obviously than others. So here we can see farmers, we can see the oil industry, we can see fisheries. We could perhaps think of the tourism that we might see in somewhere like Bergen and so on. These industries are very strongly linked to the environment and to environmental change. Changes in the temperature or in the climate make a big difference to farming and fishing. Political changes that might be brought about as a result of concerns about the use of fossil fuels would make a big difference to the oil industry. And tourism is often dependent on sites of natural beauty. If the sea levels rise or if glaciers melt, then many of these work opportunities can disappear. So career is bound up with the environment, as all human activity is bound up with the environment. And many of the things that we choose to do as a career could be impacted by environmental change. So if we look at some ideas about how Norway's climate might change, this is from a report by the Red Cross. So we might see more regular extreme weather leading to things like landslides, rising sea levels, thawing permafrost, and serious problems for the north of the country, especially places like Svalbard. So this is worrying because a sea-based country like Norway can really have some very fundamental changes to its environment take place as a result of climate change. If we look at analysis that discusses the implications for human beings of a 1.5 centigrade increase in global temperature, and some would put that 1.5 centigrade increase as happening as soon as 2030, we might see things like health issues and increased mortality, hunger and a loss of food security, a loss of GDP for most nations, increased displacement of people and increased migration, further political and economic instability. All of these factors would have profound effects on the ways in which people conduct their lives and earn their livings, and therefore will make a difference to career. And the fact that we're thinking only perhaps 10 years in the future when some of these things might really be happening. I mean, many of them are already starting to happen, but seeing some of these bigger impacts reminds us that this is within the lifetime and within the career of many of the people that we're going to be interacting with now. Certainly young people who are leaving school now might be expecting to work for 50 or 60 years, and so they're looking forward far in advance of these kind of dates, that when we're seeing predictions of big climate changes. So dates like 2030 or 2050, which sound futuristic, are very much within the career horizons of many of the people that we might be working with. So over the next 10 to 20 years, there's going to be lots of change in career. And this is clearly going to endanger some occupations and sectors. For example, the oil industry is likely to change very substantially over the next 10 to 20 years. But it will also lead to the growth of new occupations, perhaps in renewable energy and so on, and new sectors. But I think we have to be careful about taking too much comfort in that kind of fact, because this isn't a zero-sum game. It will cause problems for everyone. So even those people who move into new occupations are likely to be experiencing bigger problems in their career due to the widening climate change. So I think the point that we need to remember is that career adaptability will not be enough. We can't just take our things and move along to the next village or the next town when our towns and villages flood. I mean, that will be possible. People will have to be very adaptable, and that is something that people will have to recognize as an important part of their career, is managing that kind of adaptability. But individual adaptability is going to be insufficient. And that's why we're going to also need social and political solutions like the Green New Deal that is being suggested in the United States. The idea being that we actually develop new forms of economic activity which try to address the climate change and try to challenge it. So the question then becomes, is what Greta Thunberg is doing, is that a form of career management? Well, not in the conventional sense that we might think of. We would normally think of career management as being adapting, as reading the labour market, as understanding the context and so on. But that's not what Thunberg is trying to do. What she's trying to do is change the context, change the likelihood of environmental catastrophe. And so when we're working with people on career, how much are we thinking about their individual responses and how much are we trying to support them perhaps to engage in social responses? Now, we could think of it like this. There's both things we can do to mitigate and make it less likely that there are problems, and there's ways that we can then adapt. So as an individual, we might want to think about what career will be least impacted by climate change. And then we might want to think about how we can change the way that we work in response to climate change. But socially, we need to be thinking about what societies can do to reduce climate change, and then also how societies can reorganize to manage climate change while ensuring human thriving and well-being. I've got some references here that might be useful for you, both covering some of the basic climate science, but also some ideas about how guidance can respond. But in summary, I think our careers take place within an environmental context. The evidence tells us that this context is changing for the worst, and we need therefore to consider what kinds of responses are needed both personally and politically. Career guidance professionals will inevitably find themselves discussing these issues with students and clients, and responding to this is likely to require taking a more political and social perspective to guidance rather than a merely individual one. Thank you.